Okay, so I'm going to talk about Zero Trust, but not from an implementation standpoint. Hopefully, you've not had someone try to sell you Zero Trust as a product. It's more of a framework, definitely a framework. I propose as a business heuristic, a control that can actually enhance what we're doing for the customer experience and for your organizations. And here's why it's significant. To close out the day talking about Zero Trust, this is what a system is telling, the messaging it's telling an end user. Trust is not cheap. Prove yourself to me with each and every interaction. Simply to access a resource or take a workflow step that they're actually entitled to because of their role. And this actually has wide implications. So with that in mind, we're going to talk about looking at Zero Trust from a strategic implementation and lessons learned from my role at Trellix. I lead the customer insights, user research practice for our products. So there's lots to be learned for an audience as today, security leaders. And I cannot even imagine when you're standing in front of the board, stakeholders, and you're armed with all this data and findings of why we need to step up security. And there's some ways to talk about Zero Trust or introduce it and win over people. And there's specifically my role working in cybersecurity as a user researcher and building a customer insights practice. I cannot tell you how many times I'm standing in front of a security leader that tells me, no, we don't need to talk to the users. I already know what they need. But madam, sir, do you know that they're actually using workarounds of your product that are actually making them more vulnerable? Then I get this deer in the headlights look. But with Zero Trust, it's important to know why it is the way it is, why it's been misused in many dangerous ways, hazardous ways, I propose. And it's good to look at where we've been and where we are today. Of course, it's beyond the perimeter now, right? It's having this continuous verification. And we have to go back in the history to see where we ended up today, where we are today with Zero Trust. Because now with the advent and the advances in generative AI, we can even go further with the implementations of Zero Trust and really enhance security responses, incident response. So a quick trip down memory lane. You remember in the year 2008, this was the year when it was all the stock market crash, right? Remember? And there was a group of upstarts called the Jericho Forum, enthusiasts and executives, and they proposed this radical idea: hey, let's get rid of the perimeter, right? I love the play on words. Jericho, it's that ancient city archaeologists have discovered, right? The walls were breached and it was conquered. So this was a radical idea that kind of stuck around. And in 2010, we all know that name, John Kinderberg. And this was the year when people were lining up outside the Apple stores, right, and trusting they would get that device. But Kinderberg proposed some rather emphatic points. He said in his paper, his thesis paper from Forrester, security professionals must stop trusting people, must stop trusting packets as if they were people. A lot of implications in that statement. And forget this idea of a safe internal and unsafe external network, right? This was very new. And in that paper, when he's pushing this very good point, actually, he references something that happened in the 1980s. And you have to even go further back in history. There was a nuclear treaty being signed in DC. And President Reagan, between Russia and the US, or the Soviet Union and the US, and President Reagan actually tells in a press conference to Gorbachev, pardon my Russian here, dovyai prodovyai, which literally is translated trust but verify. And you can actually download this clip from the Ronald Reagan Presidential Libraries online. There's such a cringe moment because they're laughing all nervously. And when Reagan tells this to Gorbachev, he says, "You say that at every meeting, Ronald." Right? And all this nervous laughter, total cringe. But again, if that was the beginnings of Zero Trust as a human behavior, it's been along in these very critical moments in history, and it's good to consider the societal context. Now, that was all good, but apparently it wasn't enough. in 2015, a huge breach happened in the federal government. And again, this was the year that people were literally crossing barriers from Asia and Middle East into Europe. And so other walls and frontiers, borders were breached or crossed. And this breach really marked it before and after. Before this breach, for the Office of Personnel Management, security was focused on protecting intruders from getting in the network. But this actually proved that you can cause a lot more damage with stolen credentials, right? And so this marked it before and after. And what do we get when the federal government pays attention? We get NIST publications, right? And so 2020, middle of the pandemic, there's our first official NIST publication, 800-207, that starts defining a lot of the Zero Trust framework as we know today, early beginnings. 2021, we all love this executive order, right? And this was, again, literally, things were cooking up in the world. Over in Europe, there was these huge climate change protests. But with this executive order, it was very specific. MFA, encryption in federal sites or systems within a specific time frame. So great. And then 2022, in the midst of the conflict in Ukraine, another NIST publication with even more details and more stuff, details spelled out, 1800-35A. We were a contributor, and we're super proud of that, and we're still contributing. But it wasn't enough. We all know this breach. Not everyone's disclosed it. And I argue that through a lack of simple MFA, over 60 million people lost their data. And actually, a couple weeks ago, more people are coming forward, right, with data that was lost, personal data. And of course, we'd be remiss if we don't mention this other incident, although not a security incident, not a security breach per se, but this really blew the lid open on skepticism and mistrust on the big dogs in the industry when it comes time to making updates, right? Just please don't do it on the kernel. But anyways, now publicly, a lot of CEOs are saying, I don't trust that vendor. And as someone that works if we work in cybersecurity products and companies, this hurts us all, right, as a community. There's wide-blown, full-blown skepticism that's public when people are saying that they don't trust that as our products that we don't disclose and we're not upfront with all the limitations. So that has strong implications. So now we understand why in those NIST documents we find these types of statements, that it's not feasible to assume that all users, never mind devices and applications, but that all users within a network can be trusted. So now we can see that this Zero Trust has really been intensifying. And of course, when I see heads of state shaking hands, my mind goes back to that nuclear treaty signage, right? I'm actually from the Washington, D.C. area, and it's already tough driving around. Can't even go in a straight line from one place to another. You need your shortcuts. But whenever we had NATO, we had the Israeli prime minister, all these barricades, right? So, and security checkpoints. So Zero Trust was felt in the physical environment, just in our commutes. So even more workarounds, which is very significant. So, but now with generative AI, yes, we can enhance incident response. And in spite of all these challenges and the intensity of Zero Trust as a mindset, right, there are companies that are doing it right. And so we'll mention the good examples that I feel are just the beginning in terms of the customer experience and enhancing the workforce with responsible security, Zero Trust implementations. One of them is simply going passwordless by providing product experiences that are seamless, right? Simply as going passwordless. Two great examples in online services in the APAC region sped up their onboarding process. And another North American insurance company, overnight, because of MFA and going passwordless, blew up their adoption for 10 million of their members. And has significantly reduced account takeover fraud. Right? So those are business heuristics. Those are wins. And you can read in the Gartner reports and IDCs, right, a lot of these wins that people are doing. But I argue we can go even further, especially with AI and the advances of AI. So let's talk about the workforce. You can now, with training, literally slash the time it takes to attain advanced skills for entry-level jobs. Right? As far as incident reduction, with training and generative AI and other techniques, with content, you can significantly reduce the chances of your employees getting pawned or phished so easily, right? And improve that acumen, right? And so that they increase their acumen of security and appreciation for security. And of course, operational integration in an organization. I mean, talk about knowing your tool chain, talk about combining different pieces and integrations so you can truly achieve almost real-time assessments, right, and responses in that way. Now let's talk about the customer experience. With skills attainment, users become more proficient, right? Having that contextual training, and generative AI can help us there with tailoring that content. And talk about increasing their their incident reduction or increasing their security acumen, or even security maturity, having that understanding of why we need this complexity and be able to be proficient in these complex workflows, right? Really being able to fine-tune things, policies in their environment, rules. These are the threats we're faced, so that's an advantage. That's a heuristic that we can actually, while we're enforcing responsible security and more rigorous controls like zero trust, and of course operational integration. When users understand the tool chain and know they're not so easily would get fooled by a company that says, hey, we're the leader in this, we're the leader in that, but it can actually try things out, right, and have the proof of value to themselves. And I'll go into that a little bit further. So in summary, yes, trust but verify. It's actually never trust, always verify. We read between the lines, but it holds up. I think it holds up, and here is why it holds up. Because instead of just slashing business continuity and proficiency in your enterprises, it pays to be strategic. And as strategy 101, first of all, you have to define the scope, right? When I'm trying to promote to a cybersecurity leader, this is why we need to learn more about customer behaviors and traits. We on purpose keep the scope rather narrow, right? So that we are actually focused on answering a learning. So with that mindset, think of if you emphasize everything, you prioritize nothing. So think about the scope. What are those critical areas of the business that desperately need more rigorous controls, security, like zero trust? And then go after those, right? And that does wonders when it's time for reporting, right? Now, hopefully you set your KPIs and those metrics, and we're able to tell a story through the data, how much better we are, and here is where we're making a difference, right? So that is being strategic. You set the scope, and that helps you tell the story, the reporting, right? And this is something that we do in customer insights all the time. And it's important we do so, because that worst case scenario is still out there, right? There's more 0 days. And I always wonder, did John Kinderbeck have in mind the 0-day term when he thought of zero trust? Is it like a visceral reaction, like a tit for tat? Well, 0 day, well, no, zero trust, right? And we'll lock everything down. Those are still out there, and it's important to act. So now let's talk about the challenges, right? You've seen the good examples and other possibilities. I feel, of course, coming from a customer insights practice, in cybersecurity, these end user experience challenges are more pronounced. So I cannot imagine, in your case, when you have to promote to the board and have to balance security and usability aspects of technology, right? Productivity. And certainly today's track, we've seen a lot of that. And so what we end up doing to users inadvertently is that we're asking them to feel like a stranger on the street, asking for increasingly big favors. But we're not just doing this to one user. We're doing this to entire user populations. I mean, when you jump off the plane, you at least hope your backup parachute, you trust your backup parachute works, right? Otherwise, it spells disaster. Don't take it from me. This is actually documented in all those wonderful NIST documents, right? They actually mention there's no rigorous examination on how rigid security, or specifically zero trust, impacts the end user experience. And they quite commendably, they outline things such as security fatigue, the toil we love talking about, alter user behaviors. This one's fascinating. We've all heard the IT admin that bypasses the security team by using the EDR tool and piecing together with trace data and can never mind the security team, right? And get access to the resources they need. Or we probably heard a security team that because of zero trust and regulations, they get away from having to write those annoying FOIA reports or these other like freedom of information related stuff when they have to do hunting or investigations. So what do? They invest all this time and energy into learning how to program so they can write automations, because it turns out if you write an automation, if we use an automation, we don't have to write a FOIA report. Right? So that is an altered user behavior, additional toils or fatigue that we're creating with these rigorous security controls. It's very interesting. And of course, we all love using our personal devices for MFA, right? That comes with a little resentment attached. And there's more. Another NIST document, 1835E, promoting zero trust architecture and this mindset, actually pushes first principles of access control and least access, right? And least privilege. Not very user-friendly. In the language, it mentions end users as subjects. I don't know about you, but when I hear the word subject, I'm reminded of someone getting cross-examined severely by a prosecutor or someone in a police lineup, right? The subject. So not very user-friendly. And just about 6-7 weeks ago, building on the successes of the Zero Trust initiative in the federal government, we have another NIST document outlining now a new initiative on optimizing the customer experience in federal systems and websites, and optimizing that identity management experience. And it's great. They're talking about security, right? But I almost feel like it's too late. Because when you weren't supposed to see that one yet, but I almost feel like it's too late. When we mention usability like this, it just takes me back to the days that the human factor engineers were brought in to solve a usability problem. But how much better if we are upfront, right? So now I'm going to offer you a rigorous examination of what it feels to be an end user trying to stay productive in a zero trust environment. You probably react to some of this imagery, and it'll be in the next few slides. So. Of course, we know what it's like to feel irritated with so many security alerts, right? So many bells and whistles. That gets in the way of our productivity. What's otherwise a linear workflow or something that we're grown accustomed to, we're disrupted, right? I mean, we've heard some of the stories today in this track, right? All these times they have to log in and for these critical missions, and that's very disruptive. We're creating more steps, more effort to do otherwise intuitive steps that we were used to, right? To stay productive. We feel like the whole productivity of the team is on our shoulders with having to step through these security controls each and every time. We feel like we lack data to gain the information and the insight that we need. A lot of times it's just critical. And of course, having to authenticate each and every time, that's quite a nuisance. And we feel like we lack wisdom. We don't know where to turn. If I go this way, I'm going to set up a security control, and you see traps everywhere, right? In some of these rigid environments. And confusion. I want to double click on confusion because it is the perfect weapon for an adversary. If an adversary can throw security controls out of whack and cause confusion in your organization, that's a very powerful weapon. So with unnecessary complexity, because of security controls, we are causing confusion, right, to end users. Very critical. We feel like we are being monitored, right? You get those messages from your SOC team, hey, what are you up to? And so we end up with these burdens of guilt and frustration and shame, right? Trying to stay productive and support. Sometimes are life and death things, like in hospitals, right? When things are just difficult to use. But don't take it from me. There was a song a few years ago from a pop artist, Taylor Swift, where she actually said, I don't trust nobody, and nobody trusts me. Right? So I feel that perfectly encapsulates what it feels to be a user, an end user in a zero trust architecture environment. Interesting, like that when she wrote this song, the word of the year was post-truth. So this intensity is even greater. We consider the context of what's happening around the world as far as like how people think, right? So around that time, yes, there was that song, I don't trust nobody, nobody trusts me. The word post-truth, word of the year, if you look it up, it basically, people are considering what constitutes truth is never mind empirical evidence, is never mind objective representation of the facts, is actually your opinion and your feelings. That constitutes truth. So now we understand, right? I don't trust anybody. Nobody trusts me from a societal standpoint. And it's actually in line with what's been happening in recent years, that these organizations that people will run to because they trust it and feel safe, that trust is in decline. And that fear of disinformation is on the rise, right? Nobody wants to feel disinformed, right? That someone's lying. And so you can quite understand why when you're ready with your data and you're really passionate about something and you have that evidence, you have to stand in front of the board. It's really easy to feel like this, right? You're trying to make an important point, but people are not trusting what you're saying. And you're kind of telling people, who do you trust? Who do you trust? I'm giving away free money here, right? So it's very challenging, but it's no surprise when you consider the psychology behind it, what's happening inside a person's mind. This is classic psychology, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So it turns out in our brain or mind, there's a few internal sensations, how we build trust. So at the bottom of the pyramid is physiological needs, food and water. That's the first step to feeling safe. That's why if somebody wants to gain your trust initially, they offer you a meal, right? They offer to buy you a drink. And then that's the first step. Right? Then you let them in, right, to your psyche or to speak with you. Versus somebody just peddling something to you that you don't even know. But with zero trust, something happens. There's a cognitive dissonance that people cannot just break through. So never mind getting to the transcendence level, feeling realized, right? At Trellix, we call it soulful work, right? Sharing in this mission in cybersecurity, what we do. And part of that mission, I can tell you, being intimately acquainted with the challenges of practitioners is that shared mission that we have is keeping digital assets safe, vulnerable communities online safe, right, in our organizations. I got the best part. I go deep on the user behaviors and traits in interactions with technology while supporting this mission. And speaking with cybersecurity leaders, there is that concern, how to balance security and usability, right, in our organization. So you can read again the Gartner reports, IDCs, the trend to zero trust is rising at huge rates, and these concerns are real. So, and actually part of our research has shown that this is actually tied to security maturity, the trust in security controls, but we've actually looked at how a cybersecurity practitioner's trust in a product evolves over time, and we're learning that it's aligned to their security maturity. So what I mean by this is someone with a basic security maturity that's just starting out, learning the features, will probably not be setting new benchmarks on incorporating threat intel into advanced workflows, right? But someone who has that sensitive security maturity, who's beyond already orchestrations and advanced hunting capabilities, they are literally like setting new benchmarks, right? They can take apart the technology, prove that value to themselves, and that doesn't happen overnight. That happens with time. You gain the trust in your own proficiency, you grow in your security maturity, and you trust products, right? You're able to see that. And again, not get pawned by clever marketing. So if we go a little deeper into some of these challenges, right? Balancing security and efficiency, right? Or usability. User experience, yes. I think we can all appreciate we are making otherwise intuitive workflows extremely complicated, more than they have to be. That actually goes in line with the fact that if people don't appreciate why we need these rigorous controls, why we're treating internal traffic with as much suspicion as external traffic, that's a huge hurdle, right, to win and to get over. But once it's understood and appreciated, right, again, that takes time. Similarly to how that proficiency and trust in a product, right, evolves over time. And of course, every time you're in the board and you're talking about taking resources from another aspect of the business to fund these rigorous controls or zero trust, that's war talk, right? That's not a fun place to be. But until you're able to tell that story, that ROI story, and articulate it well, right? That's a challenge, right? And that's something that takes some time to build. But more heartbreaking of all is interpersonal trust implications. The fact that a team is no longer close-knit becomes more isolating and less about collaboration, right? Because I don't trust nobody trusts me, right? And that's real. So with all that said that I've shared, there are ways we can build trust and maintain that trust in security controls. We've seen some things, right? Being strategic, right? Careful planning, being able to tell a good story with the research, right? And win people over that way. One thing is when you have to get in front of the board, I heard today, know who you're picking a fight with, right? Cecil told me today. There's a lot in that statement, but focus on actual reporting, right? Because we come with the data, we can be quite intimidating. I mean, I think I heard early this morning, we make slides or our slide decks have 80% of our content nobody can understand, and people think we're smart. But that actually, it's not conducive to building trust, right? So focus on actual reporting, right? And avoid speculation, right? There's a fine line. And we can be very clever with predictive analysis, right? Some kind of clever forecasting. But know when you're speculating and be upfront, right, about some of the caveats. And I go into detail in a little bit on that. And this third one I'd like to double click on. Once we have those KPIs, be able to tell a story of how better we are. And specifically, that's measuring impact. How do we compare with other peer organizations in our vertical, in our industry, who are facing the same threats? How do we compare with our controls? Here's where we reduce malware, right? Here's where we reduce phishing, right? And you're able to piece together that story. So, and again, it starts from careful planning. And what we do at our company is that we open our development process up and design process to our customers. And we bring them in. We build these long-term relationships, and they love it because we pay attention to their use cases, their complexities, and their environment. And that's really working out for us. But it does wonders in building trust because we are now not going to completely ignore their use cases, right, and try to build an optimal frictionless user experience, which is quite the challenge in cybersecurity, right? But this does a lot for building trust. And of course, we've all been around someone that is promoting just inaccuracies, maybe not on purpose, maybe with an agenda, but I find we have to speak up and speak up for the data for research findings, right? And you would have already had your research and your findings for this. For example, we all there's all this hype about generative AI, but one huge caveat about generative AI is that there is no content validity, right? With data and research, we can measure criterion validity, right? Here's the outcome we achieved, and this proves we're successful, right? If you can meet that. There's instrument validity. Here's the methodology we used, and it lines up. But there's no content validity because it's highly subjective. And this is something that we experienced at Trellix. We air-gapped some language models. We interacted with them. And we told them, hey, this is what we're hearing from security professionals in the industry. Can you help us, language model, prioritize these in terms of actionability and action and criticality and priority? And it turns out it was quite useless because the language models prioritized everything, emphasized everything, so we prioritized nothing. And this exposed a fundamental truth and one of the huge pitfalls when using generative AI, right? And it's that content is highly subjective. Never mind organizational priorities and complexities, but there's also regional aspects to this, the way that we communicate. And this actually goes in line with an interesting paper I read last year about pseudo-communication with an AI system. There's a reason why we use the words we use. Again, tied a lot with the context, right? And where we've been and in our experiences and different priorities. A language model, to have that same contextual understanding, will need millions of lines of fine-tuning. I propose it's not there yet, and it's a fundamental difference, right? So when we communicate with another human, there's reasons why we use the words we use. The words themselves have a lot of meaning and context to them. A language model doesn't at the point. Maybe OpenAI and other language models make different claims, but in cybersecurity, this is critical. And we should read its findings with a grain of salt. We put this to the test. We asked some professionals, what would it take for you, and full disclosure, this was before the outage this summer, right? What would it take for you to trust an AI system to make changes in your environment? Well, a CISO said, no way. Maybe it's a little difficult to read, but I'll summarize it for you. No way unless I know what they're using the data for to train something else. I need to know that, maybe. An engineer said, maybe on a non-critical system, but that's in non-critical endpoints, but is there really such a thing? And an IT admin, they gave us the best answers. More of a hybrid approach. An AI system could just give me a report, and I can click all the automations, right? So that's kind of meeting it halfway. Again, this is someone focused on their productivity. So with everything I've shared, and thank you so much for sticking around, I offer this Zero Trust playbook built on the pains of winning over security leaders in a product-focused company running this practice. And I'm not calling it survival anymore. I'm calling it hacking playbook. We can totally turn Zero Trust on its head and erase away all fears and hesitancies, right? And here's what I propose. If you look at the attributes of Zero Trust, right? You can read the documentation and go deep on this, right? It logs data. It's driven by policies, exclusions, and things that have been set forth in the environment. It offers an assessment, and then boom, it tells you access denied or granted, right? Of course, human minds, our stakeholders, are not computer systems, but there's actually equivalents in mental processes and sensations that the human mind has. And so I literally flip these on its head, right? For example, a stakeholder's wondering, well, who are you, right? What are your credentials, right? That's like what they're observing. And then we don't have logs in our brain, but we've collected experiences and data, right? And they're trying to process what you're showing them. That's why a lot of time people say, well, let me go away and process what you're saying, right? Because this is completely new. And so immediately they start comparing. Is there something better out there? Who else is doing this? If you can get past this, now, because of certain value systems or organizational priorities, there's reasons for their decision making, right? Justify resource allocation and communications and all these types of things that we're proposing. So is that lined up to their expectations? And then something interesting happens. eventually they're going to have to, they ask if they can trust you with their career, right? If this is for something for a huge organization or something, the stakes are high, they can eventually be risking their career on the data and the findings you're putting in front of them. But unlike a zero trust architecture or system that just grants you access, I feel that the best thing that can happen is when now a stakeholder wants to build a continuous relationship with you for more findings, right? And there's no place to be, I can tell you, in working in cybersecurity. They want more findings, more insights, right? To at least help them in their decision making, if possible. So I put this all like in worksheet format. You can find it in my LinkedIn profile, and one of the articles I have it featured. And you sort of fill out, right, the different sections, and hopefully you get to that transcendence, right, with your stakeholders next time you're in front of the board or sharing reasons why security is important, right, with your teams. So in conclusion, I hope to have shared some insights, something of use regarding, yes, we want to promote these rigorous security controls. We want to promote zero trust, but be strategic, right? There's a lot to learn from gaining customer insights into this. And do so, but not at the expense of things we hold dear, like having open communication with each other, right? Talking to each other, and things like collaboration. So, thank you. And
we have a few minutes if there was a question for Louis. Does anyone have any questions?
In the back.
Yeah, so I want to get I guess your take. One of the things we have kind of seen usability-wise is now that there's like an infinite number of security pop-ups for users to authenticate, that they'll authenticate to just about anything because they don't know where these things are coming from. Well, which is kind of the opposite of what we would hope would happen, but that would also require users to understand the full IT system, which, I mean, if we taught all of our users that, then we should all just be IT people. So how do we square that circle?
Yeah, I think that's why they put this on the CISO track, because that involves communicating that to the board and having that top-down approach to communicate that, right? And our CISO at Trellix does a wonderful job at that. He communicates, and there's all this training and education, and he's very transparent when these rigorous controls are put in. So I think it happens outside of the interface. It's what I want to say. Outside of the product experiences, because let me tell you, when you're stitching 15-point product experiences together, it's not fun. A lot of insights come up from that, from what not to do. So, but yeah, great question. And I realize I'm on your way before the dinner, but we can talk later, right? Maybe at the dinner. And thank you again for your time.